and welcome to Reliving My Youth. My name is Noel. My guest this week is Marcus Vere. Marcus is one of the founding members, principal songwriter, and keyboardist of the British band Living in a Box. Their biggest hit, Living in a Box, from their debut album, Living in a Box, reached the top 5 in the UK and hit number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts back in '87. Their debut album also featured So the Story Goes and Scales of Justice, that also hit the top 40 in the UK. So the Story Goes hit 81 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Their follow-up album, Gate Crashing, amazing album, featured the top 5 hit in the UK, Room in Your Heart. Unfortunately, that album failed to make a dent in the States, and the band broke up in 1990. As you can probably guess, the very unoriginal reason why: record company issues that failed to really help the band connect in the States. They went their separate ways. Their amazing lead singer, Richard Darbyshire, released a solo album in the mid-90s, which failed to connect, which is unfortunate. And that was it for the band. They all went their separate ways until 2016. Marcus and Tish came back with a brand new lead singer, and they've been doing the festival routes ever since. They replaced that lead singer as well, but they've been going strong ever since. Marcus also discusses what he was doing during that break, which thankfully affected my now 5-year-old son. And the song Living in a Box has also found some new life thanks to a video game. We discussed that as well. If you like this interview with Marcus, please leave me a review. I would really appreciate it. Here's Marcus. So Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
So we're recording this on Election Day here in America. So I guess a song like The Scales of Justice is, pretty prevalent today, right?
Well, I like what you've done there. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it is.
Everybody, every day tries to tip the scales of justice. You step on me, I step on you, but you pull and push me to the ground whenever you want to. Money's in, money's out. I got to keep on falling over the red line. I say what I say, my eyes not deceiving. I don't wanna feel a colder heart beating. I'm not giving up. Oh, everybody, every day tries to tip the scales of justice. Everybody, every day tries to tip the scales of justice. Tip the scales of justice. You took up my car, you took up my home. There's nothing left in that I can call my own. I don't believe the picture's yours. There's too many faces hiding, not enough open doors. I say what I say, my eyes not deceiving. I wanna feel a colder heart beating. I'm not giving up. Everybody, every day tries to tip the scales of justice. Every day tries to.
I mean, who knows? Let's just hope, as I say, we were talking earlier, weren't we, that we get some stability, and let's see how it goes from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, you guys overseas are just enjoying the shit show that we are
Yeah,
undergoing right now.
we are enjoying it, but also there's a little bit of, the marathon. We thought it might be a 100-meter dash, but it was actually a marathon, and I think everybody's like kind of exhausted by it. It's contention is always a really angst-ridden time for everybody just watching it, even sort of passively, let alone you guys being over there. It's we've had our own struggles with Brexit and various other things, and changes of government, and Boris Johnson, who brought his own style of sort of Trump-like madness to the politics in the UK, and we're glad now that whatever it is, it seems to be settled down, and there's a bit more grown-ups, some few more grown-ups in the room. So let's hope that that continues on a global level. We can only hope, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all can use grown-ups in the room, and
Yeah.
it's been a while since we've had that.
Yeah, right. It has.
Yeah. So let's talk about some happier times. And I know the band performed a couple shows this year in the Rewind
Hmm.
Festival overseas. Or I guess for you in Europe, and so overseas for us. How did that go for you guys?
That was great. I mean, it's always good playing these big festivals because, first of all, you're meeting a lot of your fellow artists and collaborators from back in the day. It's a bit like we had a show called Top of the Pops, which was in back in the sort of 80s and 90s, which was the sort of tastemaker show for all the pop stars to try and get their records. It was on a Thursday night, I think it went out, so you would get your weekend sales going. And if you got Top of the Pops, then you would pretty much have a hit record. And so it was great to meet all our friends from back in the day, and a lot of them have stayed in touch. It's quite nice actually. There are no egos in the room anymore, so everybody gets on great, and it's nice to see everybody. And of course, to play the songs, the hits that people remember, and them all singing along to the hits that we had. Uh, you know, all those years ago. We'll say all those years ago. I think 87 was the start with Living in a Box, and to be still doing it now, and they're turning up. You get 30 or 40,000 people in a field who all know your music. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Was there ever like an artist or a band that your paths never crossed that you always wanted to meet that you actually finally met on one of these festivals?
Well, funnily enough, the Jacksons was one of them, and they're still going. And I met Tito for the first time about a week before he passed, unfortunately. And of
Wow.
course, he looked fine, and we had a great talk. We were talking about a mutual friend of ours who I know writes with them, who I'd written some songs with. And being involved in sort of pop, soul, blue-eyed soul, whatever you call it, you wouldn't have ever missed the Jacksons being part of that. As an influence growing up. So I'd always, I've been intrigued. Obviously they're sort of like older gentlemen now, but the band are amazing. I mean, they still do what they do. But it was just sad that that's the way that turned out. But it was great that I got to meet them.
How much do you like the British artists are influenced by like the Motown sound here in the States?
Oh, hugely. I mean, I think anybody who was growing up in the 80s, whether it was Philly or whether it was Motown or whether it was, West Coast, East Coast, soul, you know, mainly, I think in the UK for white artists, it would be black artists. So that were the inspiration of a lot of what we all did. And we put our twist on it. Remember, it was sort of like a hybrid of being brought up in the 70s and listening to 70s and 80s disco and then soul and some 60s and Motown and Philly and all those kind of things, Stax and so on. Um, and then, obviously the birth of technology influencing music and electronic music. So in Sheffield, where I was from, we obviously had the Human League and Heaven 17, ABC. Robert Palmer came from not far away. I mean, okay, he was more on the rock tip, but as things changed and technology got a bigger hold of the way that music was being expressed, with obviously a lot of synth artists, some of them coming over from Germany, with the model, she's the model, she's looking good, and all of those kind of classic Kraftwerk tunes. That sort of was where the hybrid of what Living in a Box was all about, really. It was just using tech and using the idea of synths, and then putting, the Daryl Hall and John Oates, even, some of those kind of associations and where they'd come from. So everybody's sort of regurgitating what everybody else was turned on by,
Of course.
and you end up in this sort of, well, this is our version of it, and you live and die by that. Either people go, oh yeah, that's a fresh sound, I'm liking that, I can see where you've picked that up from. If you think about a song like Living in a Box, and the opening lyric is woke up this morning, closed in on all sides. That was a lyric that was very much tipping your hat to the old blues. I think that all the blues songs, woke up this morning, how it was. Da,
Yeah,
da, 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 da.
exactly.
It was all about that. So even though it was not really a blues tune, you could hear the influence, and why I wrote that lyric on that was very much like, well, how would we start that song? Okay, woke up this morning, why not? 30 or 40 years after that sort of particular blues style was a thing. It's great to sort of reinterpret things and do different things with it.
Yeah. I'm a big Level 42 fan, and I can definitely hear the influence of
Oh
Level
yeah, well
42
we've
in some of
written
your music.
mercilessly the bass line to Hot Water for the
Yeah.
bass line for Living in a Box. I mean, we've had chats with Mark about it since. He's cool. It was just, yeah, I heard that and it just sounded like a really great record. And I love the way that that bass line chugged. Um, and there are a lot, again, there's Change of Heart, and all those kind of other classic bass lines that have those lumpy and bouncy bass lines. A lot of tunes did use that, but that specifically, that was in my mind. I think I was listening to it at the time when I wrote the backing track for what would become Living in a Box. So there's very much, he was in my crosshairs there.
So what was like the moment for you that you realized like this was something you wanted to do professionally?
Well, I mean, I suppose you do it for the love of music, right? At the beginning, it's the fact that a few local bands and there's very much a scene. I think there's also an absence of what else would you do? Because I think if you're a musician, you go, well, that's what I might be good at, or that's what I'm interested in honing my skill set at, right? That's what you really want to do. And that's really, I think, by definition, as a musician or a songwriter, it has to be more than just a passion. It is who you are. It's really visceral. And I think, also being in Sheffield at a time where it was a bit like, I suppose, Allentown in Pennsylvania, where, the steel industry used to be. It was very much where Sheffield was where the steel industry used to be up in the north of England. And it collapsed due to, cheaper goods, steel being made in Korea and abroad. And lots of people lost their jobs. So high unemployment was rife. It's also in the mining and the pit areas for coal mining, and Thatcher was in at the time and brought that to a halt. That was very contentious, but it was probably in hindsight the right thing to do. But at the time, it put a lot of people out of work. So job opportunities in that part of the world were very thin on the ground. So I think that probably was a hotbed for creativity where young people wanted to say what they wanted to say. It might be a political message, it might be an emotional message, it might be both. I think it was growing up in that environment and that particular time was what set me on the path to go, look, I learned the basics of music at school. I got to grade 5, which is piano here is like, well, you can play a bit of Mozart. You're not a genius by any means, but
Mhm.
you have got some technical skills,
Right.
some way of expressing yourself. I think songwriters, particularly, you're very unlikely. Of course, you're going to come up with a load of the other side of the coin, the Billy Joels and so on, where you get genius players, Elton John possibly, although he's not particularly virtuoso pianist, but really you almost can know too much technically as a pianist, and you start writing complicated jazz songs and you go through a million chord progressions, which as we all know, is not what a pop song is all about. So I
Right.
had learnt enough really at school to be able to play the piano and to be able to express myself. And I think had it not been for one particular music teacher who could see that at grade 5 I was about to give it up. I didn't want to go on and learn to play Rachmaninoff, but I did want to go and play, you know, some hits that were around at the time. And then he said, okay, well, let's stop doing this. Let's go down to the music shop. I'll teach you about harmony. Teach you about improvisation, how you would do that sort of stuff, which was really refreshing because usually you get a ruler at the back of your hand, right? If you weren't
Yeah, right.
homework, and it was all very technical, and I found that actually quite tedious. He was much more inspirational, so I have to thank him for that because that's why I still do what I do now. Really, I think everybody who's a creative probably has one of those moments where there's a crossroads where you probably would have gone on with it, but you could also have dropped it, or you would have given up at some point. But there might usually you'll find somewhere along the line there will be something that just happened that kept you on the road or increased your skill set or your opportunities or your network that made you put a band together that made you go further down the road than you otherwise might have.
Right. So how did you meet Tish?
Titch, I was working with the Limit Club, which was a really early days local club, 600 capacity maybe. But everybody who was anybody was playing that club when they were going out on their first tours. So the Police, B-52s came over. I think Wham, the first time when they ever went on tour was there. You'd get, a bit more punky, edgy. So like all the punk bands played there, the Pistols, the Damned, loads of them really. I even remember the Tubes coming to play that show, play that gig. It was a tiny little show, but for some reason, the owners asked me if I would be interested. I think maybe because I was a young kid into music, of doing flyers, handing out
Okay.
promotions, doing that kind of thing, putting up posters illegally at night and plastering them all over up with wallpaper paste as you did, putting up flyers and generally doing that. And then from then, they then took me on to get involved with dealing with the agents in London. and they set up a sort of sideline of promoting not just in the Limit Club but in bigger theatres. And they were doing the Clash at Leeds Queen's Hall, probably in the early 80s. And the Clash were famous for touring. When they toured, they wanted to use local bands. So in
Okay.
whichever venue they were at. Nowadays, that happens less and less because of Bions and the whole complexity. And, you know, you wouldn't get Taylor Swift necessarily,
Mhm.
playing Charlotte and finding the local Charlotte musician. She would take someone on tour for other reasons. I mean, yes, there are artists who give other people breaks. But anyway, the Clash were particularly into using local bands. So we put a thing out in Radio Sheffield. Um, and various other outlets that we were looking for local bands. We got loads of inquiries, and one of them was a band called Typhoon Saturday, which Titch was the drummer of. So he just came in and actually walked in and said, "Hey, listen to this." And I listened to it, and everything was okay. But what was really great was his drum playing, his drumming, his performance was just great. And it, sort of slightly in a sort of underhanded and very personally invested way, I sort of said, "Well, I don't think we can get you on the show with your band, but I'm actually putting something together. Would you be interested in being the drummer in the band?" And of course, as we all were in those days, like, yeah, sure, it's another gig, why not?
Yeah.
He said yes, and that's how I met him through the business side of promotions, really. And he came on board, and then we started rehearsing. Yeah, he became obviously a solid buddy. I mean, I was out with him only the other day. We went on a little pub tour in London, and we're having a little Christmas get together with a load of other musos, and still very much a good friend. And he still plays with the band, so it's great.
Right. How much uh was it beneficial for you to like be kind of like the booking, go and like, you know, book venues and be kind of on the business side? Did that help you when the band kind of, moved on and
Yeah,
got
definitely.
popular?
I mean, I started to get connections with all the London agents. And although in those days, of course, it was the MTV generation, so you
Right.
weren't particularly, I mean, bands were touring, but it's not like it is now, where bands have to tour because that's the only way
Yeah.
we can make any money. Um, but in those days, it was like more about making a video, really. And a lot of people put, especially when bands are starting, when they were touring, they didn't want to spend the money on a tour support. They would spend the money on a video. So I did get to establish some great relationships with agents who later down the line became useful. But Living in a Box, when it was launched in the UK, was really quite enigmatic. We were three white boys from Sheffield, and we were kind of sold potentially as three black guys from New York, which sounds a bit sort of weird, but that's the way the record company wanted to do with it. So they went all the way down to I think Arthur Baker remixed the first album, and he was very much involved in that scene in New York. They wanted to mail the 12-inch white labels in from New York, so they got a New York postage stamp on to all the DJs in the UK. I thought, shit, this is great. This is something real happening thing coming from New York. And of course, we were three white kids from Sheffield. It was quite funny.
Mhm.
So in a way, setting up my business relationships was useful and not useful in a way. But it did certainly teach me a little bit, or gave me a greater understanding about how the business works and probably how best to present the band when the time came, the ones we got the demos, and how to go about it. And also, when I was seeing record labels, I could name drop a few agents, and it sort of somehow gave them some comfort that I knew a little bit about what I was doing.
Right. Now you had the song Living in a Box written, right, before you even had the band name, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So whose idea was it just to name the band after the song?
About 5 minutes before they were going out into the world. The record company goes, "We're pressing the record, guys. What's the band name?" And for some reason, we had sort of band name amnesia. We couldn't come up with a name. I mean, how
Right.
ridiculous is that, considering how creative we were with all the song titles and the lyrics and the crazy
Yeah.
stuff that went on there. And actually, since then, don't ask me to tell you what they are because I think about it at different times. I go, "Oh yeah, that would have been a great name," or "That would have been a great name." Um, but to be absolutely honest, we were just totally time pressured because it was like, here's this song called Living in a Box.
Woke up this morning, closed in on all sides, nothing doing. I feel resistance as I open my eyes. Someone's fooling.
it's going out next week, guys. We just got to do the artwork. It's getting radio play. It's hot. We can't hold this back while you guys wondering about what the name is. And so we went with the idea that, it's like, well, why don't we just call you Living in a Box? And by Living in a Box, which actually turned out to be a complete disaster, and we should never have done it. It's great if you are just going to be one single, because then people know you were Living in a Box by Living in a Box. Big Country did it with Big Country, Big Country.
Yeah.
Other artists have done it, but it wasn't by any way unique, fairly unique, but it doesn't help you when you then go on to do a second record or a third record or a second album or a third album, because people, especially when Living in a Box, which was as big a worldwide hit as it was as big as it was, probably if it had just been a sort of normal hit, if you want to call it that, it would have been easier. But actually it made things, I think, it wasn't easy to get over that. Still to this day, we will play Blow the House Down, Scales of Justice, Generate the Wave, on Room Your Heart, all these songs, and you can see people in the UK in the audience going, oh God, they did that one as well. And that one. Oh yeah, I remember that one. But they won't necessarily know that Living in a Box did it, because it was like Living in a Box by Living in a Box. End of. Point. So yeah, that's how it came about. I wouldn't recommend anybody ever does it. But it was just the way it came around, and okay, it is what it is.
Right. Because I got the cassette. I mean, I'm dating myself. I before, obviously the CDs, were popular. So I got the cassette when it came out. And all America was playing was Living in a Box. I know, like, So the Story Go, I think that may have hit like 80 or 81 on the Billboard chart, but I was just blown away by just the rest of that album. How how amazing the songs were and stuff like that. And I'm like, this band should have been huge in the States.
Yeah,
And
we should have. I mean, listen,
it
everybody.
wasn't.
Yeah, everybody wants to say that, especially in the UK, want to break America. I mean, when we were, we were so sort of not Americanized, but we had so much about what we did in a slightly quirkier way that would have worked very well in the States. But you have to remember that Chrysalis Records, who we were signed to at the time, had a strange way of dealing, even though they were a global business and that they had a business in Europe and they had an office in New York and an office in LA and all of that. If you weren't signed by them in America, I remember they're putting Huey Lewis away at the time. They're doing, Blondie. They're doing Pat Benatar. They're doing Go West, who did a little bit better, but they were signed in the States, even though they were an English band. Having Billy Idol, I mean, having huge success, but those ones that were having success were signed by the US company. Okay. When you were signed in the UK, which we were, the US kind of perceived it as like, well, we'll sell your stuff, right? Well, okay, we're just going to mail. You've just mailed it to us. We've got to sell it because we're all part of the same business, but we're not investing in it because we didn't sign you. And I think that was a real problem with them. I mean, it was purely a personnel and a political issue as to why Living in a Box didn't do as well as it should have done. I mean, there were all sorts of other situations. I mean, Living in a Box, the song itself took off, and I think it got to 17 on the Billboard charts. And I don't know, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but back in those days, there were the independents who were bought in to plug the records.
Right.
And money changed hands and all the naughty shit that happened. But they pulled the independents off the record when it went into number 17. And what happened next week? It bombed. It should have been a top 5 record in the States. It's a bigger hit than it ever was in terms of its position in the charts. You can speak to anybody who of a certain age and they will know the song. It just didn't, for some reason, cross over to being a big chart hit, but it should have. But there are technical reasons for that, like political reasons as to why that happened. So that wasn't a great, we were hoping for great things. We thought 17, well, that's not bad. And then they fumbled a couple of other records, which was okay. Well, that didn't work out. And then we got to the second album, and we had a huge hit on that one called, well, Blow the House Down, which was a big hit over here.
Right.
Brian May played on from Queen and really was sort of set alight the second album. And then we had Room Your Heart, which went top 5 all over the world.
It's dark and cool tonight. I'm walking all alone, and one step at a time I'm getting closer. I know she's hard to find. Instinctively I try to take the path of love into the night. question me. No one's been here before. I am the first to see the light at your door. If I could hold you now, I wouldn't disagree. When these four walls you're protecting me. Oh, there would be no reason if you really didn't care. There would be no reason for love. The door is open wide. Is anybody there? I know this must be the hole in your heart. I really don't know why, but it's so easy to breathe. I know this must be the hole in your heart. Oh yeah, I can't feel it. I can't feel it. I can feel the love that's surrounding me coming out of you. I can feel the door is open wide. Is anybody there? I know this must be the room in your heart. I really don't know why, but it's so easy to breathe. This must be the room in your heart. I know this must be. I know this must
Except in America, where it went to number 62, and again, it was a bit like, oh, now we're really starting to not get amused because we were doing West Coast tours and doing all the radio stations and all the things you do, and then you'd turn up, and then they'd lost the record by like the second week. It's like, oh, come on, man. I mean, really, if you can't get that song away, well, you're on bloody drugs. So 52% of the world market was in the States in terms of recouping, your money. And we were thinking, well, if we can't get a record away in the States, we're sort of like you're in a fight with one hand tied behind your back, essentially. And that was really a problem. And that really broke up the band because it's just like, what is the point? We can't get a record away in the States. I mean, and we're not one of those bands that wouldn't work in the States. It's just like, yeah, we're all over it. We can play our instruments, we can play live. We've got a great vocalist, who sounded phenomenal, was hugely talented, is hugely talented. And if it didn't work, I don't know. We just thought, and then picked up the option to do the third album. We were halfway through it and thought, this, we're going to dig ourselves into a bigger hole. So let's just call it a day.
Yeah, that's a shame. You got three good-looking guys. I mean, Richard was,
No,
bona
it's
fide,
fun.
like lead singer. He had the look and everything like that. Great voice.
Great
The song,
guitarist, great voice,
yeah,
phenomenal. Very reluctant pop star though, but they often are. But he
yeah,
had the skills and the chops of Prince on guitar, and he had the vocals of Daryl Hall and Michael McDonald all wrapped into one. With a bit more sort of, I know, some more, probably black. He looked white, but he sounded like a black vocalist. They had it all. And he was in the same boat that we were all in. It's just like, what are we doing here? We're with a label that are, not doing what they should do. And I know artists tend to go, well, it's somebody else's fault. It was the manager, it was the band, it was this, it was that, it was the other. But actually, I think in our case, generally speaking, Chrysalis were just hopeless with us in the States, and that was the problem.
yeah. It's a shame because like in that era of like the Blue-Eyed Soul, Sophistopop, there were all those like other bands that you guys were probably should have been head and shoulders above. I mean, like Breathe was
Right.
there, and like Johnny Hates Jazz, all
Oh,
those
I
other
know.
bands, and
Yeah.
they're all great bands, but like, Room in Your Heart should have been just as big as Hands to Heaven.
Right. Well, I mean, Albert Hammond, who I co-wrote that song with, had just written, I think, well, he'd written the Olympic tune for Whitney Houston, One Moment in Time. He'd written,
Right.
I don't know, Tina Turner hits. He'd written so many records, so many records. I mean, his back catalogue is an embarrassment of riches. Um, and that's like, well, Room in Your Heart was up there. And I still talk to Albert and I go, what's your favorite song that you've ever written? He'll 9 times out of 10, even though he's kind of not forgotten that we wrote it, we'll say Room in Your Heart.
Right.
A songwriter's song is a great, great tune. And it's the one I'm the most proud of. And for them to put that in at number 67, that just says, can't be bothered.
Yeah.
So if they can't be bothered, I can't. I'm not, you know what I mean? It's just like, forget it, mate. You're just not on the page. So,
Yeah.
these things happen. You man up and you move on.
Right. And Dan Hartman, right, produced Gate Crashing, right?
He did.
And
Yeah,
which
Dan
is
was a lovely man.
funny.
Dan.
Yeah, because like he, amazing artist also sounds black. If you just
Yeah.
heard some of the songs,
Well,
so it's
yeah, and
just
it doesn't does it? It doesn't take much to sort of join the dots there. He'd just done Living in America, James
right.
Brown, and he
Yep.
produced that, and it sounded such an amazing record. We go, yeah, we've got to have some of that. A bit like Tom Lord-Alge, who we brought in to co-produce with him and to mix and co-produce part of the first album. Had done Trapped. No, what he no he just mixed and got a Grammy for back in the High Life, Steve Winwood,
Oh, Steve
and
Winwood,
that
yeah.
record sounds so phenomenal.
Yeah.
And he came out that whole New York scene with his brother. And, he's a lovely man. Again, we're still in touch and has mixed and produced loads of hit artists since then. So our intuition was right to be working with these people. And Dan was just a lovely man, absolutely amazing. And told us all sorts of stories, working with James Brown and various other people. But he was great. Yeah, really good to work with. Multi-talented, great musician, and multi-instrumentalist as well as being a great sort of producer. He had a great idea of how something should sound. And then we worked with Chris Porter, who just produced Faith with George Michael,
Okay.
and he mixed and co-produced Room Your Heart, I think. And he actually, talking about Richard Darbyshire, had said that there was only one vocalist who he thought came near Richard, and that was George Michael. So you have to
Wow.
say that, that's quite, like you say, what an amazing voice. How come we didn't go further with it? Yeah, it was all there. It was just a political and a business thing that just didn't work out. We just got on the wrong side of it. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. Because it took me, I don't remember how many years after Gate Crashing came out for me to actually get it because just there was no publicity in the
Hmm.
States for it. It
No,
was
no, nothing
a
at
shame.
all. And I think also a double whammy was Chrysalis were changing their distribution deal. Well, I think they were with Sony and then they went to SEMA, which was an EMI operation, or the other way around. I can't remember, which was another excuse. It was just like, oh, well, because it's great if you can get product in the stores as it was then. That mattered. Distribution was
Yeah.
king, as it still is with physical product. And then of course things have since changed with the digital revolution, so that's changed. But so not only were they not announcing the fact that we got a second record or working the record properly, they're not creating a demand in the stores. They're not going to get the products in the shops. So what's
Right.
going to happen? You're going to stiff it, which is what they did.
Yeah. It's a shame. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So how did you guys like basically bump into Richard and for him to join the band?
So that will be back just after I met Titch. We started working together, the two of us working up some songs. I was working for my old man back in those days, and he had a warehouse space, and I cleared out some room in there to get some keyboards in, set Titch's drums up, and then we wrote the backing track, or I wrote the backing track for Living in a Box. Went into a studio, put a guide vocal on it, and by pure coincidence, and this is a demo studio, so it's like an 8 track, really funky vibe. The next guy in on the session after us was Richard. And the guy who I was working with, who was a keyboard player also, whose studio it was, said, "Oh, the guy who's coming in is pretty good, by the way. And if you could get him to sing a guide vocal even on this, would be amazing because he is like this white, looks like a blonde Elvis, but it sounds like an amazing, he's got this incredible voice. You've got to get on this." So we asked Richard if he would sing on it, and he heard the track as we were literally running the tape on. He said, before I got to ask him, he said, "Oh my God, that sounds like a hit record." I go, "Well, would you sing on just a guide vocal? We don't have a vocalist." He said, "Yeah, sure, I've got 10 minutes." He whacked down the guide vocal, and it was just like, oh, that shiver down the spine moment when it was like, wow. He just was amazing on it. Fortunately, it was in the right key to
Right.
start with, because it could have been in any key. And yeah, he sounded phenomenal, and we knew we'd got something. And Richard at the time was doing sort of slightly more AOR kind of style of music. He'd left the EMI. He was with another band called Zuzu Sharks, I think they were called. And I said to him, "Look," or we'd recorded a few more songs. I said, "Look, if I can get a record deal off this, would you be interested in joining the band? Because it sounds so phenomenal. I just couldn't imagine it. I was so concerned that we'd never be able to better that." and find someone else. Well, if I had the idea of taking Richard's vocal off and trying to put someone else on that now would be like impossible. So he said, "Yeah, okay. I'm looking for my own stuff. If I get a record deal before you, then I'm sorry, guys, but you'll have to take my vocal off. But if you can get a record deal, I'd be really interested in joining you guys, and maybe some of the stuff that I've done we could work on together, and we could do something with it." So it was almost like,
Yeah.
ready, steady, go.
Exactly. Right.
So Titch and I got in a car one night, drove down to London. We were up in Sheffield, so it's what 200 miles down the motorway, down the freeway. Um, Arrived in London in an area called Notting Hill, which people will know of, Holland Park, and then there's a little red phone box right on the main drag there. And it's still there, and we don't use phone boxes anymore, but it's still there,
Hmm.
the London red phone box. Titch and I got in there, opened up what was then the yellow pages, where you'd physically look for a business, a business directory of, we started at A under the record companies for A&M.
Hmm.
By the time we got to C for Chrysalis, we got a record deal.
Wow.
We just literally walked in the door, banged on the door. You got to listen to this. We saw publishers, and then Richard Branson got involved with Virgin. Sony got involved. BMG, who were coming into the UK at that time, got involved, and the whole thing just blew up. And we needed to get a manager to help us negotiate it. And in the end, we went with Chrysalis because we thought they were doing really well with artists in the States. What we didn't really understand, as I've explained to you already, is that we really
Right.
needed to have them more on side than they were, rather than just getting mailed some stuff from the UK that they should promote, right? If they weren't vested in it enough.
Mhm.
So it was a mistake. But they were doing well with Midge and Ultravox in Europe. They're doing great with Go West in the UK and Europe. So we thought, well, why not? But oops,
Yeah.
that turned out to be a bit of a bad call.
Yeah. No, it's a shame. Do you think there should, I mean, I know it's business and creative, they kind of separated, but like more creative people making those decisions?
Uh, in what?
I
From the
I
record company's
mean,
point of view?
like on the business side. I mean, I know it's like, people, the business side just looks at like, basically money and stuff like that. They don't really
Yeah.
focus on the music, but like, shouldn't there be kind of like a nice hybrid of the
Well, there
two?
should be. I mean, there was a character called Ron Fair who is quite well known, has gone on and produced records, who was head of A&R in the New York office. I think it was in LA. I can't remember one or the other. And he seemed to me politically was the guy that needed to have produced the first
Mm.
Living in a Box album, and then
Right.
we got it away. So there you go. That tells you all you need to know.
Yeah. That's a shame. What's Richard up to these days?
Richard wanted to retire. I mean, he was, I say early on, he was one of the most reluctant pop stars you'd ever hope to
Right.
meet. He got very nervous. It's like, how can you be nervous with a voice like that, perfect
Yeah.
pitch, and just looking like he looked and playing like he played as well? I mean, just unbelievably talented man. But listen, people, you don't know what goes on in their heads and how they see things, and he was really nervous. I mean, and really didn't like performing live, although he could totally smash it every time. And combine that with the problems that we had with the company, the US record company. I think, just came to the conclusion that he really didn't want to do it anymore. Not just with Living in a Box, but I don't think he wanted to be in the music industry anymore. He
Right.
just saw it as a load of BS. And if you couldn't get through, a lot of people will persist and they can often succeed, but he wasn't that guy. I think he just thought, no, this is all a load of shit. And I really don't want anything to do with it. So I think he then did try to put out a solo record, which didn't work out. It rarely does. I think when an artist leaves, I think even Mick Jagger struggled to sell records as a
Yeah.
solo artist. So yeah, it doesn't always work. George Michael, of course, as we talked about earlier, being an absolute exception to that. But there aren't many who leave a band, go and have a solo career. Not as many as leave bands and then try and have a
Right.
solo career that succeed on the other side of that. So I think he just thought, well, I'd rather go and, I think he went to sort of teach vocals and but do some songwriting with other artists and become a songwriter more than a performer. And then I think decided to get into property. So he started, buying a few things and selling a few things, and thought, well, this is a much easier and less stressful way of living life. And moved to the coast and is chilling out there. And we
All
still
right.
see it. We're still in touch. There was no acrimony at all. It was sad,
Right.
as you say, for various reasons that it didn't work out, but I understood his reasons for it. And if I blame anybody, it's the record label, which is easy to do, but I have
Mm.
my reasons and I stand by them, and it is what it is.
Yeah. All right. Well, as long as he's, happy, which is good. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Obviously your music still lives on. Anyone can listen to it, but I mean, you got a different generation with the Grand Theft Auto.
Right.
the video game, which is I played it, hugely successful. When you first heard that your song was going to be like featured in a game like that, what was your
Well, it
reaction to
wasn't a game like that then, was it? I mean, that was 90, when was it? You tell me, 96, was it?
it? What was it
2000, 2013, sorry, yeah.
2013 it came out? Yeah,
2013, that was when it came out. And they'd already had a few goes at it. And I know that
yeah,
they came from the UK, and they invented a game that they thought was completely crazy and nobody would, it was
yeah,
almost like taking the Michael, really. It was just
right,
like, there's a joke. I mean, let's just run around shooting people in a
yeah,
car, running people
right,
over, got ladies in prams
exactly.
with babies and stuff.
Yeah,
And I think I think they were just sort of like, yeah, okay, this isn't going to work. And then of course, what do you know? It becomes a phenomenon. And
yeah.
Grand Theft Auto 5 was a phenomenon. I mean, it really was. Well, I mean, so I remember getting the phone call going, oh, they want to use your song. They're going to come in, put it on a radio station. You get in the car, you're going to select non-stop pop, which is one of the radio stations or something, what is it called? Something like that, I think it was.
I think so. Yeah.
Um, Something like that. And there's only a sort of about 30 or 40 songs, so you'll be on quite a high rotation. And it was a fairly good deal. But obviously you don't get residuals or royalties, so it's a buyout. So that was sort of like, okay, well, for the exposure, you could argue that the bank manager doesn't sort of lend money to you on the basis of exposure, right? It's like, where's the hard currency here? So, but anyway, we took a flyer and it took off, and yeah, it's upsells. We get loads of our Spotify numbers and all sorts of things. I can see how old people are, where they are.
Right.
It's holding up mainly because of things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and films and TV shows that it's been used on, or adverts, whatever. Those are the things that do make the difference nowadays. And by the way, although I can't say too much, watch out for Grand Theft Auto 6.
Ooh, okay. So am I going to hear like, a room in your
Oh yeah,
heart while,
yeah,
while I'm
yeah.
like beating a pregnant woman with a bat or something?
Well, let's see. Let's see. I mean, I know that they keep putting it back, bringing it out because of the AI developments in the back end, because
Yeah.
AI is going to be a major part of the new game. And that is obviously is a relatively new thing in terms of building that into the game. I think they really want you to have a lot more interaction with the characters so that will change over time. So it's not
Yeah.
the same thing. And to do that, they've had to hold the game back for various technical reasons. But I'm
Right.
hoping
Yeah.
the Living Box, the band, will have some involvement in that. It would be
Oh,
amazing.
okay. Definitely look forward to that. Yeah.
We'll catch up on that when it happens, all right? You
Oh
never
yeah.
got it's never done till it's done. And I know that the game was supposed to come out last year and it's supposed to come out next year, but we'll see when it comes out.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of like shift gears a little bit. My youngest son is 5 and he knows how to use a phone like nobody else.
Mhm.
Always on YouTube, and he
You get him,
discovered.
he's not quite old enough to do all your social media yet, but of course it won't be long before he is.
Of course, exactly, exactly, yeah. And he hasn't played Grand Theft Auto, 5 yet, but I'm sure it's coming soon.
There it
But
is.
he did discover a Kids Truck TV once.
Right.
A- Yeah, and he's obsessed with like police cars, ambulance, any of the first responders and big
Of
trucks.
course. Yeah.
And yeah, he absolutely loves those videos. So how
Right.
how did you come about forming Kids Truck TV?
Well, that was because for the same reason that you really is. I had a little boy at the time who was 3, and boys and girls though some also by the way, tractors, diggers, fire
Yeah,
engines, fire trucks, first responders. They sort of almost quiver with that excitement when they see these monstrous big machines. And my wife is from Boston in Massachusetts, and she was on a visit somewhere. And for some reason, there was a TV, a VHS back in the day that was doing really well that somebody had put out. And I don't know whether it sort of even charted actually in the video charts there was such a thing. That was basically a locked off camera in a building site. And kids were loving it, but it was dull. It was just like, okay, well, if that is the low bar.
mm,
And I was also, as you know, a songwriter, and I wanted to sort of do other things. And so my wife said, well, why don't you go and film some tractors in a field, and and you put your music to it, and we'll put a little teddy bear in, which is all a bit low rent, but it was kind of funky
mm,
and worked. Um, so that's what I did, and I phoned up John Deere. I can remember there was who are a multinational business, And I said to them, this is their UK operation. And I said, oh, well, look, we're doing a kids' TV show for preschoolers, all about tractors and farms. And do you have any gear that we could film? And had they said, and have you done this before?
Yeah.
I would have probably never even seen the light of day, but they didn't. They
Yeah.
went, yeah, sure. There's some, there's about 6 million quid's worth of uh, tractor gear in a farm in Suffolk that we're showing people. I think it was in the summer. Combine harvesters and tractors and balers and all the
Yeah.
gear. Go and film it. Yeah, we'd love to be involved. So we went along. I got a friend of mine who was a film cameraman, and we stood around for a bit and we filmed these things going up and down. And then we weaved a bit of a storyline into it and filmed all the animals. It's all very bucolic and beautiful English farmland. And it put it together and made a 30 minute show. And then I started writing the music for it. And realized that kids learn a lot through song rather than being told, as you know,
Yeah.
with play groups, right? They learn and can remember things easier, like the A B C D E F G, all
Hmm.
those sort of songs. That teaches them the alphabet, right, and the various other things. So I've sort of pretty soon got a handle on sort of the style and how to do it, and then put it out. And we literally, it was a mom and pop business. We got the DVDs made up, got the sleeves done, got into a couple of mail order catalogs back in the day, and we sold a lot of DVDs, and it really, really took off. And then the DVD business, as we all know, collapsed overnight. It was
Yeah.
like done. We could see it coming, but it was done. Literally one day, yeah, we'll buy DVDs. No, we won't. It's finished. So there was a period of a couple of years where everybody was going, well, what else? What is going to happen? Then there's this YouTube. Well, YouTube, but that's a bit like the Wild West, which I'll tell you more about that later. But
Mm.
okay, so we'll try just put the catalog, at which stage we've done what, 4 or 5. We put them all up on YouTube. And to be honest with you, I put them up on YouTube. There was Here Comes a Tractor, Here Comes a Fire Truck, Here Comes a Digger, and Here Comes a Train, I think. They all went up, these preschool shows. They were educational, they got music in, but they showed live action, real world machines. Put it up on YouTube. 6 months later, 5,000 views. And then 6 months later, 10,000 views. Then 3 months later, 100,000 views, 500,000 views, a million, 5 million, 10 million. And I mean, now we're into sort of about 60 million channel views. I mean, it just absolutely flew. But that was a sort of viral reaction, really. Um, and then we had technical problems with YouTube, who quite rightly were having problems with kids of a certain age, 3, 5, watching stuff on YouTube. And then you remember that thing, that scandal of that ghost would jump out at them, and
Yeah.
were freaking out. And I think the US took YouTube to court over their content management, over who was saying what.
Right.
So then you had to mark your product as MFK, which is made for kids. And they set YouTube Kids, which they curate. And nobody could work out how you actually get on that or what was going on there. So it was a bit of a wild west, really. And that did affect things for a while, but then it all came back. And when we thought a couple of years ago, well, let's try and develop that and do something more with it. But let's create some animated characters as well as live action. And we're just launching next year the first full-length Cody and the Cloud, which are 2 animated characters. One is a tablet, one is a
Right.
cloud, and they work like a cloud and a tablet do in real life. They share information with the kids, and he launches an app and teaches kids to spell. He teaches kids color recognition. He teaches the kids how to count. Very simple, really nice. And then you just go through his screen into this lovely live action world to show the things again that we did, but updated. And it's a really nice vibe, and I'm doing the music for that as we speak. So hopefully that will take off next year. You're not necessarily going to guarantee you get the Here Comes a numbers that we did with those videos back in the day, which just went viral,
Yeah.
but it is
Right.
on the same channel. It'll be on Kids Trucks TV, and so you get some uplift from that. So we're hoping we'll launch and we'll get some traction. Yeah,
Oh, that's great. And the beauty about kids is that they'll just find it, which,
exactly.
yeah, that's how, my son
They'll
finds
just find
half
it.
the thing. Yeah, they'll
Exactly.
find it. So, and plus,
Yeah.
they'll click and you look, what are they watching? And then you have to remember what they're watching. So,
Well, of course you do, and
leave it behind.
they've tried to set up there. I think there are 3 or 4 over the top platforms that have tried to do that, but of course you don't get anything like the numbers that YouTube brings. I mean, you're global.
Yeah.
We can put it up in sort of 20 different languages overnight. We can dub it. We can you can do so many things, and it's a penny business, but it works 365. I mean, it's going around 24/7. They're watching it in India, then they're watching
Yep,
it in the
exactly.
West Coast, then they're watching it in the East Coast, then they're watching it in the UK, and round we go. And kids are all the same in some respect. There might be cultural differences, which you have to be aware of. But generally speaking, if you've got the right content, the right songs, and the right characters, and it's holding their attention, I think the more creative and a little bit more uh, yeah, the more interesting you can possibly make it to hold their attention. Um, I think slow TV doesn't work with kids, but there's certainly you can get a lot more education into something, and parents feel better about it. Nobody wants to feel necessarily like they were, or we have done, where you would have to just have a break from the kids, right, and get DVDs on, just and use it as a babysitting video. So what? I just need an hour, or I need half an hour off.
Yeah.
And as long as they're not being plonked mercilessly in front of it and they're
Right.
doing it. And if they're having a fun watching experience, if they're learning something at the same time about the world around them, then that's great. That's really our aim.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids like to learn when they're not told to learn,
Yes, or they like to learn without feeling that they're learning.
exactly, especially
You know what
when
I mean?
you're,
It's a passive
yeah,
experience, isn't it? If you think about watching something and you can get them really involved in it. There are things like Dora the Explorer and Blue's Clues and all these things that have gone on. Then they have different ways of communicating the same thing, which is, accounting, spelling, letter recognition. We tend to pitch for the 2 to 5s, and obviously that's a huge in terms of their abilities at 2, very different to their abilities at 5.
yeah,
But that's really the preschool zone we aim for. And I try and write songs that they love, that are fun and a bit quirky, and have fun learning.
yeah, absolutely. My oldest son, who's now going to be 20, was watching Little Einsteins when he was younger, and
Yeah,
that was a fantastic show because that
yeah, it was,
incorporated
yeah,
a lot of classical music and painting,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and he learned all about Mozart and all that stuff and
That's it. Of
Monet, and it's great.
course, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so,
great. And then there was Bob the Builder, wasn't there, and all that sort
yeah,
of stuff.
absolutely, all
Yeah.
those shows. Yeah,
Which again sort of was like there's lots of them. There's lots of them around. A lot of it's coming out of Asia and is particularly slightly phonetic, a little bit crazy, and I'm not sure what the point of them are, but I know they're hugely successful and they get gazillions of numbers. But I'm trying to create something a little bit more homespun and a little bit more wholesome. Um, so we'll see.
yeah, and maybe you can sneak in a "Living in a Box" song in some of these videos.
Yeah, of course. Why not?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard "Living in the Box" on the radio?
Hmm. Sort of. Actually, I can remember where we were when it because I think in the UK it went to 42 first week, and then 17 second week, 10, and then 5, and then 5 off the top of my head, and it stayed up in the top 5 for ages. But I do remember it charting, and then I remember we were doing a video, and somebody said, "Oh, do you realize we've just gone from 42 to 17?" It's like, "Oh, we're going to have a hit," and the record company was going, "Yeah, and the pre-sales and the orders for next week and all this are going to be huge." So you're going to have a big record. That I remember. I do remember being told also that Tony Blackburn, who was a big sort of he's a DJ in the UK and he had a big taste-making show on Radio London, had who did he have? Bobby Womack on the show,
Okay.
and they put the song "Living in a Box" on the 12-inch version and played it 3 times back to back on the radio, which has never happened before or since, and probably not allowed to do it. And that, in a way, was a talking point. Then all the press picked up on it, and I remember hearing about that. And of course, Bobby Womack then took the song "Living in a Box" and tried to put it out in America before we put it out.
Right.
And I remember Chrysalis Records going, he was on MCA, and I think we were on Chrysalis. They're going, "We're going to have to injunct this man. Clearly, he's trying to get the record out before you are." So there was that. So there was a bit of a press thing. And also, what, from Richard's point of view, as a blue-eyed white boy soul artist, to
Yeah.
have someone like Bobby Womack trying to get his song out, that didn't do any harm, did it? That was great. And we
No,
ended up with
definitely.
Bobby, and he was a wild man, and he was a
Yeah.
became a
Right.
great friend.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you guys, have done like the rewind tours, in Europe. Has there ever been any interest in coming over to the States?
Yeah, there has been interest, but I mean, I think the principal issue with us now is because Richard's not the original lead singer. I think
Right.
that makes it difficult sometimes for US promoters, particularly going, "Okay, so you got to 17, and we know the record's a big record, and I see artists who I would to be fair, not naming names, who are lesser artists doing them, and I'm like, and you kind
Yeah.
of feel a bit like, because Bryan Chambers, who's now singing, he sang and sings with Pink Floyd, and he's
Yeah.
worked with Prince and various. He's an absolute phenomenally talented singer. Is great. So I would hope that we would get someone maybe who would go, yeah, why not? Let's put Living in a Box in. But there's been interest, but I think that might be the reason why we haven't done more in the States since. And also, yeah, there are some 80s tours, and I think there's a little bit more of it happening, but not like it is over here. There's a huge
Right.
amount of 80s
Yeah.
nostalgia. And in Europe, I mean, yeah, they're big tours, and they're playing, stadiums. There are
Yeah.
shows that are, 60, 70,000 people. And I think, in the States, you'd be lucky if you did a small theater tour, or maybe you could do the Vineyards or
Right.
some other shows where you may be talking 2 or 3 thousand. So again, then that becomes like a mathematical business decision.
Right.
If you put a package together, which was like the old Soul Reviews used to, like in Philadelphia and
Yeah.
LA, where they take a tour, or Motown, they tour 6 or 7 artists at once with a house band. That can work because costs are kept down. But sometimes with a house band, it becomes more generic because it's not you, it's like a house band, right? Which is a bit
Yeah.
different. So you wonder what the point of it all is sometimes. But listen, if somebody said, "Oh, we would like you to do a tour of the States," we would definitely be considering it if it stacks up.
Right. No, yeah, that'd be great. And I have to get over there sometime to see one of those rewind festivals.
Oh
So
yeah,
sure,
definitely.
that's definitely
100%. Yeah, there are
makes
loads actually. I mean, there's another series called Let's Rock.
right.
But there's and then there's sort of all the sort of club tours that we do in the winter time, so we do those sort of 80s nostalgia things. But I think the industry is finding it hard again in the live environment. I think post-COVID, everybody was rushing out and they couldn't wait to bust loose again and get in amongst the live performances. I think there were probably, I'm not sure on the numbers, but I think it was something like there were 340 festivals in the UK in
Wow.
2022. And I think half of those have gone to the wall since then because there was the big sort of, the elastic effect of bouncing
Right.
everybody post-COVID who wanted to see everything, and then it stopped. It just
Yeah.
ended. And people are much more choosy. The cost of doing things has got more expensive post-COVID. Insurance, putting bands together, all that kind of stuff. And, I think a lot of promoters are finding it hard to stack up. So, I think there are less shows going around. But having said that, if somebody had said to me, that the 80s was still going on in 2024 and people really wanted to see that at the level that they do, certainly in the UK and Europe, I wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah.
Really, it is still huge. And, let's face it, most of them are in their 50s and 60s. And the good thing about it is, as I always said, is that the artists who are doing it are still fantastic. So you're not going out to see some basket case of some
Right.
thing that you
Exactly.
remember being really amazing. It was your band, right? You don't want to look at go, really, that is now that I wish I hadn't seen that. That's not the case, actually. They're
Yeah.
actually as good as they ever were, if not even better. Yeah, so I've been to some great shows where everybody's just freaking out because the bands are just smashing it. And the 80s there was so much difference, wasn't there, about the artists? They were unique. There seems to be, and it sounds like an old fucker thing to say, but it's a bit more homogenous now. It's not like I can't tell the difference between artists, but it just is very samey to me. Whereas if you imagine having a culture club or a Simple Minds or a Police or a Sex
Yeah.
Pistols or a Living in a Box it's like what? That's so varied the way they looked, the influences they took on board. My goodness, you don't get any of that now.
No, you're
I
absolutely
was
right.
talking to somebody the other day who used to be in very high up in a record name label that will remain nameless. But he was saying, honestly, if David Bowie walked in, we would not sign him today.
Wow. Yeah. And besides the Beatles, it's like Bowie is one of the biggest influences of all time. You know,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just too off the wall. Just where do you pigeonhole? Where do you put Hunky Dory? I mean, even with Queen, I mean, they had enough problem with Bohemian Rhapsody. You can imagine that
Yeah.
now. It's like, oh, it was difficult enough then.
Right.
And that's what music business is all around. It's all about celebrating differences and being exclusive in your own madness and going off and trying this version of that and mixing this style with this style, bringing in, okay, the technology is already there, but it's using was using sort of digital tech in a way, because sequencers, that changed everything. Sampling then changed everything. Now we're in digital recording, we're putting out full orchestras on our Macs. but then at the same time, we're all downloading the same plugins, and by definition, you're going to end up with a lot of samey stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So the 80s was wonderful for that because it's a huge celebration of the various. It was just a huge, broad band of artists with different vibes, and I just don't see it. Okay, it's a different era, but
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Absolutely. But if the two Living in Box albums, I think, are fantastic. They're criminally underrated and they should have been
Oh,
bigger than they are. Everyone just go back and listen to them because they hold up and they're unbelievably fantastic. And Marcus, I really appreciate your time today. Good luck with everything, and I'll talk to you soon.
well, thank you for having me, as I said before, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
And a special thanks to Marcus for joining me today. Check out their website, livinginabox.com, and check out their first two albums, Living in a Box and Gate Crashing. They're both on the streaming sites. They're amazing albums, and I want them to gain more traction after all these years. If you ever get a suggestion, hit me up on Twitter, now X, at the first Noel19, or like the page Reliving My Youth on Facebook. Go to iTunes, check out all the past episodes we've had. While you're there, please rate and review the show. I'd really appreciate it. If you don't have iTunes, not a problem. Show's on SoundCloud, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon Music, basically wherever you can find a podcast. New episode will come out soon. Stay safe, everybody, and happy holidays.